Hi, my name is Jesse, and I'm going to show you how to configure a guest network on the GL.iNet B1300. So I have one that is pretty much brand new that I just put OpenWRT on. So what we need to do in order to create this guest network, and by the way, the default configuration is pretty good for use on the mesh as kind of a home router doing DHCP and NAT, standard IPv4 type setup. So we're pretty much just going to stick with the defaults and add this virtual network on top. Before I do that though, the one change that I'm going to make is just configuring the existing wireless, or kind of the wireless SSID that will be associated with my LAN, my private, for my personal devices, my phones, computers, things like that inside my apartment. So I'm going to just name that after my node for example. Going to add WPA2 PSK here, and that's it. Actually, I lied. We should increase the transmit power as well. And enable it. Let's go ahead and bring up our transmit power as well. Okay, cool. Alright, now let's add our virtual SSID to use as a guest. That's another thing. It's usually a good idea to use access point WDS because some stations may want to bridge their wireless traffic. And if you set it up this way, both normal stations and WDS stations will be able to connect to the access point. So that's usually a good thing to enable. So I'm going to use the SSID NYC Mesh Community Wi-Fi, which is kind of a commonly used SSID within the mesh. I'm going to create a new network, call it guest, and I'm going to leave wireless security turned off, although I think in the future we may decide that we want to enable encryption. Nothing about this, what I'm about to show you, demands that this needs to be open, but I'm just going to leave it that way for the example. So I'm also going to turn on client isolation, which prevents people who are accessing your guest network from accessing each other, because they don't really know who those people are. Probably, most likely, they might be in different apartments, they might be on the street. So we don't want to provide a way for people to kind of attack each other, or trick each other into thinking that they're the router, that kind of thing. So that's why we should enable client isolation on that network. Okay, cool. So that's up and running now, but it's not associated with any, or the interface that it is associated with is not configured yet. So people can probably connect to this SSID, but they won't get an IP address, they won't be able to access the internet or anything like that. So let's go ahead and set that up. So the protocol we're going to use is static, and I'm going to use 192.168.2.1/24, which is just the next /24 up. You can see the LAN, the existing LAN, is 192.168.1.1/24, so it's just the logical next one up. We have a DHCP server, and going to save and apply. And then we need to configure a firewall. You can see currently there's no firewall rules associated with it, so let's go ahead over to firewall, and let's add a zone. We'll call it guest, and we will reject input by default and forwarding, so that people on that who connect to this network aren't accessing our LAN, for example. And we're going to associate or cover network guest, and we're going to allow forwarding to public internet only. So go ahead and apply. And then there's one other change we're going to need to make here because, as I mentioned before, we are rejecting input by default, but we really should allow DNS, or we will need to allow DNS. So I'm going to add a new rule, TCP and UDP, port 53, and then I'm going to make a small change because you can see the source zone by default here is incorrect. It's WAN, but the source zone here should match guest. So go ahead and apply that. Okay, cool. So you can see we now have our new zone that can forward to the WAN, but nowhere else, and does not accept input, which means, well, except for DNS, of course, but and probably a few other things, ICMP, etc. You can see here in the traffic rules. But other than that, no, like the configuration interface we're looking at now, people won't be able to access from the guest network that way, which is good. They don't need to be doing that. Okay, cool. So we are, I believe we are all set up here. We have, you can see the IP subnet associated with this interface, this new interface that we created, which is in turn associated with this wireless virtual SSID, which has client isolation enabled and no encryption turned on. So let's go ahead and watch this associated stations area and attempt to connect a device and see if it works. So I'll pull up my phone here and check out the available networks. Okay, I see NYC Mesh Community Wi-Fi connecting. Okay, and you can see this station is connected. Nice. And just check, make sure we can access the internet. And looks good. Cool. I also, as you can see under interfaces, I did plug in my WAN to the mesh, into my mesh router, so it's getting an IP inside the mesh, which is what's allowing us to access the internet. And that's pretty much it. You now have a separate and secure guest network that you can use to extend the mesh. Hope you enjoy, and let me know if you have any comments or questions. Thanks.